Good evening, everyone. We are going to start off by just sharing a little bit of information on how we are providing Spanish language access for our meeting tonight. So I will hand it over to our interpreters to walk through how to turn this function on.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Hola a todos. Muy buenas tardes. This is Felipe, one of your simultaneous interpreters, together with my colleague Tania. Soy Felipe, uno de los intérpretes simultáneos, junto con mi colega Tania, el día de hoy. If you want to access interpretation on Zoom, which is the same as translation, and if you're using a computer, you will find an icon in the shape of a globe at the bottom of your screen. This icon says interpretation underneath it. Please click it and then click on English. And you will be ready to hear a live translation or interpretation of everything that is spoken in Spanish into English. And if you're using a smartphone, scroll all the way to the end of your menu at the bottom of the screen as well. Tap on the three dots, tap on language interpretation, then tap on English, and then tap on done. I would recommend you to do this if you're not bilingual. In case somebody speaks Spanish, you will be able to hear a live translation of what they say. Si están utilizando un computador o un portátil, por favor encuentren un icono en forma de globo que dice interpretación en la parte inferior de su pantalla. Hagan clic ahí y luego hagan clic en español. Y si están utilizando una tablet o un teléfono celular, vayan hasta el final del menú hasta encontrar 3 puntos. Hagan clic en esos 3 puntos, seleccionen interpretación de idiomas y luego seleccionen español. Y así escucharán una traducción o interpretación en vivo y en directo de todo lo que se habla en inglés al español. Finally, we would like to remind everybody who is going to speak at this meeting to please keep it slow so that the quality of the interpretation can be maintained at all times. Y les pedimos, por último, si van a participar en esta reunión, que hablen un poquito más lento de lo normal para que se mantenga la calidad de la interpretación. If you happen to need any further help with interpretation, me and my colleague Tania will be keeping an eye on the chat in case you have any questions or any doubts. Estaremos monitoreando el chat por si tienen alguna duda o si tienen alguna inquietud respecto al servicio de interpretación. That's it from us. Over to you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And just a reminder, everyone should go to the interpretation globe and select a language, even if you're selecting English. So please go ahead and do that. All right, we are going to jump in here. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. We just heard information about providing Spanish language interpretation. In addition to that, we just wanted to let everyone know we will be keeping track of questions that are being added to the chat. And anything that is something we can quickly answer as a point of clarification while we're presenting, we will try to do that along the way. And then we will have a more extended period for question and answers following the presentation. In addition, you should have gotten a notification when you joined that this meeting is being recorded. We will be providing both the English and Spanish recordings on the website so that this information will be accessible to other residents as they are looking to engage on this project. And finally, just wanted to make a quick reminder that we are all here in service of our community and making it better, and ask that we all be kind to and respect one another as we are sharing things or asking questions. So with that, we're going to jump into our content. So we are here. I am Lisa Miller with the Planning Department. We are here to welcome you to the first phase of engagement on our new Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO. We're excited to talk with you about the first drafts of content on this project and to start hearing some input. And just wanted to make sure that you all know we will be having many additional opportunities throughout the next several months for you to give input. So this is just the first of those. So we will be providing a presentation of content to begin with, a more extended question and answer period, and we will be walking through how you can give input through the website using a couple of tools. So with that, let's just jump in. Many of you may be familiar with the comprehensive plan that has been a project that we had worked on over several years recently. We wanted to start by helping everyone understand how this new project, the new UDO, is connected to that work. So just a quick understanding, the comprehensive plan is a community vision or kind of policy. This is our high-level vision for how we manage growth and development over the next 5, 10, or 20 years. And this work was adopted in, I'm sorry, let's see if we can get someone muted here, hearing some feedback. Okay, that's better. Sorry, y'all. So we went through an extensive process to create this comprehensive plan or community vision for how we manage growth and development from 2019 to 2023. Planning staff in collaboration with community members and many city and county staff members led an effort to create this plan and worked towards equitable engagement and outcomes in that process. What that meant is that we were working to reach communities that have been left out of past planning processes or that have been harmed by past planning policies. It also included working extensively with engagement ambassadors who were community members who were better able to engage within their own communities that have been underrepresented. And the engagement data from these efforts were incorporated into the new plan, starting with what we heard through those engagement ambassadors. As a result of this, the 2023 comprehensive plan describes our community's vision for Durham going forward, and it's focused on equitable outcomes, particularly ensuring the vision represents the needs and priorities of residents who've not had a say in past plans. So as we're moving from our now adopted comprehensive plan and we're beginning to look at how we implement that plan, the Unified Development Ordinance, or UDO, is a big opportunity for implementation. So within the comprehensive plan, there are over 30 specific actions that say that we should review and revise the UDO as part of implementing the vision of the comprehensive plan. The Unified Development Ordinance is our development rules or laws, also called regulations. This is a set of rules and regulations that control the development of buildings and land in Durham, both the city and the county. It's called Unified because it includes rules both related to the subdivision of land as well as zoning rules, which regulate how land is used, as well as things like the shape and size of buildings. The regulations in the UDO are informed by the policies in the comprehensive plan, but they're two separate documents, and the UDO project that we're currently working on is intended to work towards implementing that vision in the comprehensive plan. And just the next step in this process as we move from vision to rules that will help make sure that development is matching that vision is actual development projects. So the rules in the UDO are what's used when a development project is proposed. So that's how this unified development kind of connects what we see around us in our community and what that vision is that was adopted last year. So we wanted to share a little bit more, just, big picture, what the differences are between the comprehensive plan and the UDO. So comp plan is a policy document helping us understand where we're going and how we get there. And it's used to inform public decision-making around land use and other related topics, particularly by folks like our city council and county commissioners. The UDO, on the other hand, are actual laws relating to land use. The ordinance is the law that implements that policy. And that ordinance is not a static document. And this moment right now is one where we're making significant shifts to that ordinance, but also over time, smaller shifts to that are proposed and approved by our elected officials as well. So we want to talk a little bit about a few other common terms. Um, we will be sharing a number of links to materials that are posted on the website. One of those is Terms to Understand that has more of the terms on the slide here. But we just wanted to share a few definitions as we get started that are essential. So we've already kind of talked a little bit about what the comprehensive plan is and what the Unified Development Ordinance is. The other primary things we want to define for you are the three parts of this project that we're doing engagement on and seeking input on right now, which are draft versions of the zoning districts, the zoning map, and the use table. So our zoning refers to regulations that control the use of private land and the shape, size, and overall form of buildings. Every property that's in Durham City and County has a zoning designation that says what's allowed to be built on that property. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a moment. But the zoning map shows which of these districts apply to any given piece of property in the city or county. It's a visual representation of our zoning districts showing how land throughout the city and county is designated for specific uses. Every property in Durham has a zoning designation regulating how future development or redevelopment may occur on that property and is shown on the zoning map. And the final piece is the use table, which indicates the allowed uses or activities within a specific zoning district. The use table lists permitted, conditional, and prohibited uses for properties within each zoning district and provides clarity on what types of development and activities are allowed in specific areas, like whether a district permits retail or residential or industrial uses. So as we're getting into this project and we're looking at how to implement the vision for the comprehensive plan, we know that the Unified Development Ordinance is one tool that can help us with that implementation, but we also know there are a lot of things that it can't control or is not the best tool to address. So we wanted to share just a little bit more about what the UDO does regulate and what it does not regulate. So one big piece of what the UDO does regulate are administrative procedures. So what process someone goes through when they have a permit, what kinds of notice are required to surrounding properties, who has different responsibilities or authority in those processes, and what kinds of enforcement are required or allowed for those sorts of things. And the other big piece that the UDO does regulate are actual development standards. So that includes the zoning map, the zoning districts, and covers things like land use, building size, site design, open space, density, buffers, environmental protection, etc. There are a few things that the UDO does not regulate. One of those is regulations that are in other codes. So we have a building code that's separate, a stormwater code, a minimum housing code. Those are not things that are contained in the UDO because those standards live elsewhere. In addition, there's two things we wanted to call attention to that the UDO does not regulate because it is not allowed by our state legislation. One of those things is design elements for homes that are 1, 2, or 3. So a duplex, a triplex, a quad, a single family home. Our state does not allow us to require design standards for those properties. We will talk about a potential workaround for that a little bit later on in the presentation. The other piece that we can't regulate is the cost of housing or requiring housing affordability. So that's another piece that we know is really important, and we'll share some information about opportunities for incentivizing affordability in new development later on as well.
Lisa, we had a quick question in the chat.
Yeah.
Somebody was asking, what does the minimum housing code refer to?
Yes, so the minimum housing code is basically setting out, in order for something to be considered like minimally acceptable and safe for someone to live in it, what are those standards? And if someone else is able to drop a link to kind of where someone can find that information, that would be great. But essentially, what's kind of that minimum standard required in order for people to safely inhabit a home? That's a great question. All right. So we wanted to share just a little bit more detail about some of the kinds of things that zoning regulates, and show some illustrations of kind of how those show up on a site or building. The lot size, the building size and form, and where a building sits on that piece of property, how far away from the street. It also can regulate the building exterior aspects like doors and windows and entry features or locations. It also can regulate what uses go into a building, how many dwelling units, how many homes on a piece of property, um, as well as things like site design that can include things like parking and access and things like that. Also, how many and kinds of trees are planted or preserved or other things like that. So this is just a little bit of more detail and depiction of the kinds of things that we can include in our zoning district rules. So the last thing that I want to share with you all before I hand off the presentation, just a little bit more about our goals for the new Unified Development Ordinance project. So as mentioned already, a primary goal for this project, and really the reason that we're undertaking it right now, is to implement that vision that's in the new comprehensive plan. There are a number of things, that is a large document with a whole lot of priorities, policies, and actions we should take to try and implement those policies. We just wanted to highlight a few of those here. We know, unsurprisingly, housing choice, housing affordability, being able to find and afford and access a home that fits the needs that you have and the budget you have, we know is a very high priority in our community, and it's a high priority in our comprehensive plan. Protecting our built environment, and focusing on kinds of development that can be oriented around use of transit and walkability, while still preserving the character that we have in Durham. And additionally, looking at recreation and open space, making sure that we are retaining and protecting our trees and tree canopy, finding places to increase open space and just access to nature, as well as promoting sustainable development technologies, strategies, things like that. The comprehensive plan also specifically talks about aligning zoning districts with place types in the comprehensive plan. The place types are essentially just a description of a future character that we want to see on different properties within the city and county. For some of those place types, we have a zoning district that's very aligned with that place type. For others, we don't have a zoning district that allows us to implement the character that's described in that place type. So we want to make sure that we are aligning the rules that we have with the vision of what we want places to look like. In addition, the comprehensive plan also talks about concentrating growth within the urban growth boundary, so growing more up or in rather than out to the edges of the county. And in addition to comprehensive plan implementation, we have a chance as we rewrite the new UDO to improve the organization, usability, accessibility of the document for anyone who wants to use it, whether that's someone who's actually proposing to submit a permit or application, or residents that are trying to better understand what might happen, what could happen, or what is happening around them on property. So some of the ways that we are working on this are trying to consolidate some of our zoning districts where possible, expanding our use of graphics so that people can get a better understanding visually of how things might look on property near them. As part of that kind of visual, also focusing more on form, which gives you more of an expectation of what will be present on the site, and focusing a little bit less on use and density specifically. And also as part of that kind of comprehensive plan implementation, as well as the usability, we have what are existing called development tiers that are kind of, there's one around downtown, one around our compact neighborhoods where light rail transit was proposed, and then kind of an urban, suburban, and rural tiers that are layered on top of our zoning district requirements and can cause confusion and difficulties. So removal of those development tiers is part of both the kind of usability of the code as well as implementation of the comprehensive plan, as those were removed from the comprehensive plan when that was adopted. So with that, I am going to hand things back over to Robin to continue to talk about how we frame this conversation.
Hi, y'all. Like Lisa said, my name is Robin, and I'm going to be getting into sort of, well, I guess we'll start out with framing. So, with all the background that Lisa's given us, we can clearly see that UDO really can shape the way that change happens. But I do want to emphasize that it can't stop change from happening. Ultimately, this isn't to say that gentrification is inevitable, but just to reiterate that the UDO is a tool to shape change, not to halt it. Change is inevitable and it's happening right now. We can't control real estate. We cannot control rent or development costs. We also can't control how property is bought and sold. But if we do know that change is occurring, and then this process needs to focus on how we can use the tools we do have, like development rules in the UDO, to try and shape the change into outcomes that we want. And so as part of this process, likely all properties are going to be receiving a new zoning district designation. So it's also likely that all neighborhoods are going to see change as a result of this process. So ultimately, this is a balancing act. We need to consider trade-offs, manage our expectations accordingly, and really use the tools that we do have in order to influence the outcomes for aligning with the comprehensive plan. So how are we implementing the comprehensive plan? How do we take essentially what we learned from 4 years of engagement during the comp plan and turn that into the development that we want to see, right? So some of the major themes that we heard during that engagement is obviously housing affordability, environmental protection, 15-minute communities, expanded transit options, decreasing sprawl, more job creation, and more public space and recreation. This is probably not surprising. So there are sometimes, these things are sometimes in line with each other, right? So decreasing sprawl is generally better for the environment and more environmental protection, right? The more dense something is, the more trees we can preserve. But often these things can be in conflict with one another. So since land is a limited resource, we literally cannot make any more of it. Every development is technically a trade-off, right? So looking over to the left, I've laid out some of those trade-offs, but there are many, many, many to think about. So for instance, every parcel with housing on it could have been a forest patch and or tree coverage. However, we know that we want housing in our community, and that's a trade-off. Additionally, things like low density, increased land prices. So if we know that housing affordability is a huge want from residents, then we need to consider that limiting the amount of density could cause an increase in price. And so why does lower density generally mean a higher land value? It's because it's a scarce resource, right? Water is going to be more expensive in the desert than it is in the Great Lakes. And so the last sort of example that I threw up there is just that single family development usually lessens transit demand. Transit demand is fueled by ridership, and so it requires density to support regular service. Buses won't run as often if there are less people to ride them. So therefore, we know that many of the desires that we heard from residents during the comp plan require that increase in density, right? But increasing density also has potential negative effects. So increases in pervious surface and potentially more stormwater runoff, traffic, neighborhood change. But we ultimately can't expand transit opportunities, decrease sprawl, or conserve tree canopy without that denser urban core. So going back with those themes, how are we densifying our urban core to get at what we heard during the comp plan, right? So the first is building up, not out, trying to concentrate development within the urban growth boundary, helps us preserve more existing tree canopy. It also allows for a greater diversity of housing types and design flexibility, as well as less sprawling single family development. As I said before, transit requires ridership, and ridership is supplied by density. Compact urban development also supports walkability. You're more likely to walk if it's a little bit closer to you. And so the other way that we are densifying the urban core is by creating new zoning districts. And so through those zoning districts, we're hoping to better support mixed use developments, and I'll talk a little bit more about those in a bit, which better support transit, walkability, and neighborhood scale commercial uses. We're also hoping to allow a flexibility of uses to better support job creation through a variety of non-residential uses. As Lisa mentioned, we're shifting towards a form-based code, so the residents know more of what to expect from development, even when it's by right, which is to say when it doesn't go before council or another board. We've created new open space zoning districts to work on those strategic conservation and park planning goals that we have through the comp plan. And we're also going to be incentivizing new affordable housing options. And I'll talk a little bit more about all of that as we keep on going. And so what are the new zoning districts? You can see they're all laid out here. It's residential mixed use, commercial, employment, institutional, open space. I will be going through all of them. I will say that I'm going to focus more on the residential, but we'll cover all of them at least briefly. One thing that I'll note is that there is an IX, which is an industrial mixed use district, and that's been recently proposed and isn't included on this graphic, but I will be going over it. Additionally, UC is shown under the institutional districts, and we are still calibrating that potential district, so we're not going to go over that one within this presentation. All right, so for every zoning district, there are 3 important components to consider. Lisa's gone over these, but I'm going to go over them one more time. So the first is the district standards. So what does it look like, right? So what are the height limitations? What density is allowed? What are the setbacks, lot size, etc.? Sort of like, what does it look and feel like when you're next to it? The second is the use standards. So what sort of uses do we allow within that zoning district? What can go there, right? So, if you live in a neighborhood, you probably can't have someone come in and build a Walmart right next to you because we don't allow that sort of commercial and residential, things like that. So thinking about like what can go where. And the last is just sort of the new zoning map, which is showing how each one of those parcels is zoned, which is to say, essentially, where is it? And is this an appropriate designation for that specific location? So as you're moving through all of this information, and Lisa's going to show the engagement materials that we have for all of y'all, later on. Those are the three things that we really want to think about in this first module of engagement. Do the district standards look right to you? Does the use table look right? And how do you feel about where those have been mapped? So I'll also start by saying that the new zoning districts were drawn from the place type map, which was adopted as part of the comprehensive plan. Place types are categories that help organize similar types of places found throughout Durham and some new places that have not been built yet. Essentially, they describe the character of different places and how they may change in the future. And so each differing place type is described in detail within the plan. And so the first four residential zoning districts that we're going to talk about, which are RA, B, C, and D, were primarily drawn from the established residential place type. And so I took a snippet from the comp plan, and you can see it over there on the right. But so the established residential place types are primarily drawn from neighborhoods with a variety of housing types. So places with like single family, duplex, townhomes, small apartment complexes. Think about those existing infill neighborhoods. Some of the other examples of residential place types that we have within the place type map are going to be mixed residential neighborhood, apartment and townhouse neighborhood, planned suburban neighborhood, things of that nature. And so I also wanted to throw this up. This is a snippet of a map showing that established residential place type within the urban growth boundary. One thing to note is that you can see it makes up roughly 1/4 of all the land within the UGB. And so getting into those districts, we're going to start with RA. And so this is residential preserve. It's pretty similar to what we have for the existing RR zoning district as for parcels that exist outside of the urban growth boundary currently. This is essentially single unit homes on large lots of at least 3 acres, with a width of 200 feet. And so you're allowed 1 unit and 1 ADU per lot. The next is going to be RB, a little bit more intense from a residential use perspective. It's most comparable to RR within the UGB or our existing RS20. And so it's still going to be single unit homes on larger lots, but it's approximately only a ½ acre rather than 3 acres with the hopes of preserving that existing, rural suburban character that we have in parts of Durham. The next is going to be RC. And so this district is, it was proposed as a way to protect existing manufactured home parks. These areas will have to be rezoned and go before council in order to shift to allow differing residential uses. So what we've done is we have zoned existing manufactured home parks under RC so that if folks do want to make that change, there is a measure of protection, right? Because they have to go to council, and anyone that lives within those manufactured home parks can speak against that, et cetera. So just to say that we're not proactively zoning any new land for manufactured home parks, but trying to preserve the ones that we do have. This is in line with what we heard during the comp plan from residents who live within those manufactured home parks. All right. And so RD is one zoning district. It has 3 options. Essentially, it has a base, which is going to be option 1. Just to back up one step, you can use, if the parcel is zoned RD, you can use any one of these 3 options. They are not 3 different zoning districts. So if you're going to use the base, you'll have 5,000 square feet as a minimum lot size. You can have 1 unit plus 1 ADU per lot, and that's a maximum. However, there's no maximum unit size and there's no affordability requirement. For the compact option, which allows for multiple units, so long as each unit has a maximum of 1,200 square feet, the number of units is 1 per 1,250 square feet of lot area, which is to say that you would essentially get 4 units on the 5,000 square lot from example 1. So you get 4 times as much density, however, you are getting smaller units. And so this is pretty similar to what we already have in regards to the existing EHC standards. But so as Lisa was saying, we are restricted to not allowing, or excuse me, not requiring design standards for single family up to 4 units. However, since this exists as something that folks can opt into, it gives us the opportunity to actually impose design standards on them. So why that is important is that it presents like a really good time for us to think about how we can incentivize design practices that we want to see as we become more dense, right? So we want to allow design flexibility, but we know that, increasing density might have those negative trade-offs. So what are the ways that we want to essentially help density fit better within those existing neighborhoods, right? And so since it's an opt-in, we can think about what sort of design requirements we might want to see on that more compact, like dense development. And so option 3 is essentially an affordable version. It allows for 1 unit per 625 square feet, which is essentially 8 times the amount of the base. However, there is an affordable metric that has to be met first. I will say that is still being considered. Staff and Code Studio, who are technical consultants, are working with other departments to ensure that sort of financial viability. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But that's a brief overview of these to start. And I think we have a poll next, Carl.
Yes, so we've just started the poll. So this is a quick response asking what kinds of design standards might you want to see for the compact and affordable options to help ensure these developments better fit into the existing community. And I think, as Robin said, thinking about these as an opportunity to sort of affect the design of these more dense developments. So if folks could take just a minute, if anybody has any thoughts about this, we'll put those. And yes, there was a question to go back to the previous poll for a second, Robin, or if you could do that. Or sorry, the previous slide, not the previous poll. And I'll also mention that there we have the links to the draft zoning districts, including the RD district, are in that link there, and those perhaps in an easier format if you're wanting to look at the details of the square footage and sizes and things like that. Yeah, we'll just take a couple more seconds. We've got some, looks like a number of answers are coming in. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. Just pull up some of the answers quickly. Just giving some examples. So people are mentioning wanting to see environmental requirements. There's a comment about porch requirements or impervious surface restrictions, use of street parking, relationship to addition to the height of adjacent buildings, stormwater design standards, green space, orientation to the streets, maximum heights, green spaces and trees, and things like that. So I think those are some of the examples. I think I'll hand it back to Robin and Lisa now.
Awesome. All right, so jumping back in, this affordable option I want to talk about a little bit more and just sort of affordable housing generally. So the UDO is not the primary mechanism that we have for creating affordable housing. As Lisa mentioned before, the UDO can't control rent prices. So essentially, affordable units are generally dependent upon subsidies and tax credits. I don't want to get super into this, but I do want to at least make sure that everyone has sort of a base. Affordable housing is generally calculated by what's called AMI. You might hear that a lot. That generally stands for the area median income. This is determined by HUD, Housing and Urban Development, which is a federal agency. This depends on both your location and the number of people within a household. And so households that are making 30% or lower of AMI or that area median income are generally served by public housing or other heavily subsidized units. Other affordable units often rely on low-income housing tax credits. What you might hear folks mention often are LIHTC. And so we do currently have the affordable housing density bonus within the UDO, which serves as one way that we can try and use the UDO to leverage and create more affordable housing. Essentially, we allow that increase in density if at least 15% of the units provided are affordable. However, we're essentially not seeing this used very often at all. And so I just want to quote the comp plan really quickly, which has a direct action that says, explore revisions to the affordable housing density bonus in the Unified Development Ordinance to increase utilization, such as allowing affordable rental units with an average affordability level of 60% AMI or lower. I just wanted to throw that in because I want us to sort of, stay grounded in the fact that we engaged for 4 years with the comp plan. It was adopted. This is our guiding document, right? And so we really need to think about what it says and how we're implementing it. So in that new RD option, we need to make sure that the incentives are calibrated in such a way that we actually get the outcome that we want, right? Which is more affordable housing units. I'll also say that there is additionally an affordable option within those mixed use zoning districts, which are RX and CX, and I'll talk a little bit more about those as well. And so this is a map of the transit opportunity area place type, which makes up roughly 5% of the land area within the UGB or the urban growth boundary. You can see that these areas are often located along major transit corridors. The hope is that by focusing mixed-use development within those areas, we can incentivize greater density and more transit-oriented development, which is essentially just development that isn't car-focused and car-dependent. And so by using these mixed-use zoning districts, which we've essentially split into RX and CX, and the difference being RX generally focused on residential uses, commercial on commercial, CX on commercial. The number after the zoning district title in both refers to that allowable height. So RX 3, 5, and 8 allows for 3, 5, and 8 stories. And then CX 3, 5, 8, and 20 are the same. CX 20 is generally reserved for places like downtown, right? And so they also refer to low, medium, and high intensity housing. So the intent is that it gets more intense as it goes up, right? And so some of the place types that we were drawing from as well are that apartment townhouse neighborhood place type, mixed use neighborhood, transit opportunity areas that I sort of went over already. And so one example that I wanted to show just graphically is the RX3 on the left, and you can see that it is limited to 3 stories. It also has a maximum build to, so it is required to sort of be along the street. The same with the CX on the right. You can also see that it does have 8 stories as well. So just sort of a graphic depiction of those two districts. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the commercial districts. From left to right, they go from the sort of least intensive commercial uses to the most intensive commercial uses. None of these districts allow for residential uses. It's just commercial, right? Hoping that, you know, folks will use CX and RX if they're trying to do both. And so the first is commercial neighborhood. This is going to do things like accommodate neighborhood serving uses. The footprints are limited to only 15,000 square feet, allowing things like convenience stores, restaurants, hairdressers, banks, potentially, you know, something to think about too when you're looking through the use table. You know, are these things that you think are appropriate or not? Things like that. Currently, drive-throughs are allowed, but they have to be located at the side or rear of buildings, things like that. Moving into commercial general, that's CG, it's going to be less restrictive than CN. There's no limit on the size of building footprints, and it's going to be essentially more intense in terms of use than commercial neighborhood. So you're going to see more, you know, big box commercial centers, hotels, car washes, you know, things that are less appropriate for that neighborhood scale, right? Additionally, there's no location restriction on drive-throughs. And so the last is going to be commercial heavy. This is going to be sort of the least restrictive commercial district, the most intense commercial uses, so auto body shops, auto paint facilities, you know, light manufacturing, things that you generally really don't want next to residential and things like that. Also no location restriction on things like drive-throughs. So next, we know that one of the things from the comp plan that we heard a lot was, you know, job creation and things like that. So these are the sort of employment districts that we wanted to create and make sure that we held space for, you know, employers to come in and be able to develop. And so, you know, the first I'll start with is the IX. And so, as I said before, this one isn't actually mapped yet, but it's essentially meant as a new district, which includes, you know, a mix of that light industrial, but also residential uses. Attended more for things like transitioning areas between residential and industrial. Allows things like apartments, convenience stores, restaurants, offices, you know, things like that. Moving over next is going to be the IH, which is going to be essentially industrial heavy. It's going to be, you know, the most intense industrial activity. So sort of, you know, using it to zone those places that we already have for industrial manufacturing areas, you know, places that already have a pretty significant impact, making sure that we have a zone for those. And so moving from there into IU, this is sort of a district intended to create mixed employment and technology hubs, things like research and collaboration. Honestly, this is, I think, sort of shaped, it sounds a lot like RTP, right? So things like research, testing, development, labs, all that sort of stuff is pretty similar to areas like RTP. And so the last within the employment districts is going to be the IC. This allows, you know, a pretty similar set of uses as the IU, the previous district, but it's going to be more like a campus setting, right? So like larger lots, more open space, larger buildings, things like that. All right. And so the next that I want to talk about is going to be which it's the civic zoning district within the institutional district's umbrella, but it is the civic. It's essentially intended to accommodate a variety of civic and institutional uses, and those uses, you know, serve the surrounding neighborhoods, such, you know, things like schools, places of worship, hospitals, museums, libraries, you know, things like that. City Hall is a great example pictured there. The one thing I'll say about this is essentially that the district standards read in such a way that it's delegated to the surrounding zoning districts, which is to say that, you know, in the height row, it'll say same as adjacent, because these areas are intended to, serve the surrounding neighborhoods, and we want to keep them at the same scale. So the last two districts that I'm going to go over with y'all tonight are going to be the conservation and the park zoning districts. And so essentially the conservation district is going to be intended to create, preserve, enhance land as a permanent open space. This is more, this is essentially like less active in a way, right? This is more to conserve land. And so you might see trails, you might see like some buildings, but it's relegated to only, I think, 10% of the entire parcel. It's supposed to be, predominantly unoccupied by impervious surface and things like that. And the other side of that is going to be parks, which is essentially intended to create, preserve, and enhance parkland, meeting those active and recreational needs. We're going to see more impervious surface because there's more activity there, so like playgrounds, ball fields, dog parks, all that sort of stuff. And so we're sort of using these as a way to meet those conservation and park planning goals that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. And so lastly, from me, I just wanted to give y'all a glimpse of the use table. The whole thing in its current draft is available online, and we hope that you'll have comments on that too. Essentially, just to remind y'all, the use table determines what can go where, right? And so each district has a list of those uses underneath, and these are normally divided into different categories, essentially within residential, commercial, industrial headings. But that's sort of basic. It's a pretty long table. There's a lot of stuff that you can do with land, right? So the other thing to note is, so when you're looking at this, you'll see a bunch of different letters. The L there says that it's allowed, but there are limited use standards. So essentially that means, yes, you can do it, but there are an additional set of rules that you also have to do. So that might be that, like, yeah, you can do X, but you'll have to have a larger buffer between you and the residential property next to you, or something along those lines. The P is going to be anything that's just permitted outright. The M's are going to be minor and major special use permits. I don't want to go into those too much, but essentially that means that to do that in that zoning district, you will need to go before a board to show that you have met the appropriate criteria. So yeah, sometimes these are permitted and good, but first you need to go before a board and show that you meet the standards that are associated with that use. And then the two dashes just mean that it's not allowed. And so I just wanted to show all of that to you. This is just a snippet. Like I said, the use table is actually like very large. But yeah, any input y'all have on like what goes where and how, these sort of questions, I think are going to be really interesting and really useful as we start thinking about the use table. And the use table, I think, is often it's often looked over, but it's incredibly important in how the UDO functions. And I think that's it for me.
Yeah, thank you, Robin. So we're going to do another quick poll. This one I'm going to launch now. So this is asking about what kinds of commercial or business uses would you like to see within your neighborhood? So this is getting at the idea of, as the comprehensive plan is calling for, thinking about how we can infill in a sensitive way commercial uses within existing neighborhoods so it's easier for people to access daily needs. I'm going to keep this poll up for a couple of minutes. So I'm going to close the poll at 7 p.m. and we'll go through some of the answers quickly. So we'll see y'all in just a second. And please feel free. There's a lot of questions. We're definitely keeping track of them and trying to organize them. So if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And we're going to be entering our Q&A session in just a little bit once we go through answering some how to give feedback. Okay, so we're going to take just a couple more seconds. Okay, so we're gonna end our poll now. So we have some, just quickly reading through some of the options here. Childcare providers, want to see small stores with goods or services, coffee shops and small and locally owned retail, nonprofit fitness facilities and restaurants, small grocery stores, banks, restaurants, personal grooming and small food vendors, bicycle repair, small grocery stores, restaurants, cafes, a lot of mentions of grocery stores, less automotive, more medical, retail and grocery, event space, and things like that. I believe I'm sharing the responses here. So we're going to hand it over to Lisa, who's going to talk through how we can get feedback, and then we're going to open up our Q&A session.
Thanks, Carl. So we just wanted to share a couple of screenshots and kind of let y'all know what information is on the website, and then we'll jump over to the site and just kind of walk through a couple of things quickly. So we've tried to pull all of the relevant information for the engagement period that is occurring currently on one page, which will get dropped in the chat, but it's just called engagement materials. Essentially, what we've got here is information about the actual engagement events, including one like tonight. We've got 2 more in-person engagement opportunities coming up now through the middle of November. It's also got information, the links to the draft content, the zoning district standards, the use table, and link to the map that were shared earlier. In addition, all of the materials that we've created, the handouts for in-person engagement and just kind of additional kind of educational information are linked on here in English and Spanish. And then we've got a couple of tools for online engagement that we'll walk through shortly. One other piece of information that we wanted to share with you all about the online content, our technical consultant, Code Studio, has been hosting what they call Code Connect meetings, which are a little bit more focused on just sharing technical information. And so this is a location on the website as well that we'll point out in a moment, where you can see those past presentations recorded. Again, those are provided in English and Spanish, where they walk through the standards that are proposed at this time. Can be another resource as you're trying to provide input. So with that, I am going to jump over to the website and just briefly walk through how to access information on the site and how to engage with things on the website. So I'm going to walk us through, just if you found out or you shared with somebody a single site, which is engagedurham.com. That is a place where the city and county have a number of projects linked that we are doing engagement on. So new UDO is one of the projects shown there. If you click on that, it'll take you to the main page for the project. You can navigate through and find quite a bit of information here, but right up top here is the link to where we've got all of the information pulled together for this round of engagement. And this is the direct link to the engagement materials site that we'll put in the chat. So as I mentioned, we've got the first thing here is just letting folks know we're doing engagement and that they can check out engagement opportunities on the upcoming engagement page. So we jump over there. Folks can find all of the engagement events that we were planning this fall, or a couple of them left after today. In addition, there is information on, how to RSVP to those sessions, and then that information is in Spanish as well. We go back to our engagement materials page. The next thing that you'll find is a link to the actual draft content. Again, this link was shared, Carl dropped in the chat earlier, but it's got those 3 pieces of information, the regulations for the new zoning districts, the zoning map, and the allowed uses. So if we jump over to this page here, and what we've got are the current public review drafts. So the draft new zoning districts are in a PDF here. If you open it up, which I'll do quickly, each zoning district has as a 2-page spread of information for that district, starting with. So this is essentially what you'll see for any one of the districts is 2 different pages with a couple of diagrams and listed out the various dimensional and other standards that relate to that district. So that is a long document with all of the different districts included in it. Another document here, Robin talked a bit about the allowed uses table. So again, this is another draft that we are asking for input on. It has some, primarily it has a translation from our existing use table and districts into the new proposed districts. And so we do want to get more input on where there should be changes related to limited use standards that Robin mentioned, or places where maybe a major or minor special use permit might not be needed. Other potential kind of consolidation of things that could make this simpler. Those are things that we're interested in looking at incorporating. And the last piece of information here is a little bit more. So we've got the draft zoning map, and it's got a couple of different options for how you consume that information. So we're going to open this up in a new tab. You can also just navigate around it embedded in the page here. But just for our purposes, we will jump over to a new tab. And what I want to call your attention to is there's 3 tabs up at the top here: side-by-side viewer, slider viewer, and the last one here is comment. So as this loads, the side-by-side viewer is showing on the left-hand side what the existing zoning in place today and the place types that were adopted with the comprehensive plan are. Hopefully this will, okay, there we go. And on the right-hand side, showing the proposed new zoning. So as you zoom in, it will zoom both maps in at the same rate. And so you can kind of look side by side. So that's one way of getting a better look at how these compare. Just give it a minute so I can zoom in and just show you all what it looks like. One of the things to note is if you don't see labels on the proposed zoning, you may just need to zoom in a little bit further so that those show up. All right, let me see if it will let me change viewers. My computer is freezing a little bit. All right. So the second option for taking a look at this is a slider. So on one side of this bar it's the same thing as left and right. So if you move it over here, everything on the left side is always going to be the existing. I think these might be labeled wrong. I need to check that. On one side, you will see the existing, and on one side, you'll see the proposed. We'll make sure that that's accurate and get that corrected if not. But again, you can zoom in. You can also search for a specific address up in the bar, and it will zoom into that address so that you can take a look at what is proposed. So here you'll see downtown, and you can use that slider. The last piece of kind of map related content here is actually a way to put map comments or to post input that's specific to a particular location. So it does require you put in an email address, but then you will come to this little map here. And again, you can search for an address or a specific place, or you can zoom in. And again, you zoom in far enough and it'll show you the labels of what's proposed. And so you just move using the panning around and zooming in and out, you can find the location where you want to leave a comment. And then you have space down here just to leave an open-ended comment, basically just letting us know what you think about the proposed zoning for that area and if you have any input on what that should be. So those are the three pieces, again, of the proposed zoning map and how to look at that. So the last piece of information I want to share with y'all. So down in the online engagements here, again, there's a direct link to the proposed zoning map and the comment tool for that. There is also a written survey monkey survey with some questions, some information where you can go through, and it's just a handful of questions where you can provide open-ended responses that we'll be taking a look at and making sure that we understand what y'all are interested in as we look at ways to revise the drafts before we get to a final draft of the plan. So, all right, so just a couple more things that I want to share, and then we'll get into questions, and we can go back over any of the things that have been discussed this evening so far. Just big picture, the project timeline. We're in the midst of the code drafting process right now, and obviously this is one of several rounds of engagement that we'll be having on that draft content before we get to a public review and revisions, and then get into the actual process to adopt the code and start using it. So we will have, in addition to our current engagement, we'll be getting content from our technical consultant in kind of additional chunks. The next one will focus on development standards, so things that kind of apply across different zoning districts that relate to open space requirements, buffers. If you're providing parking, what does that look like? All kinds of things like that. And then the next section will be looking at kind of if you're dividing land, what are the requirements around that and lot sizes, as well as kind of the supportive infrastructure that goes along with development. And then the last piece is going to be kind of we'll be putting out the administrative aspects of the code along with a revised draft of the other pieces that we've gotten input on and made adjustments to based on input. So that's kind of the big picture, what we're looking at for engagement timeline. And now I am going to turn it over to Bo to get into some more Q&A.
Lisa, real quick, there was a quick question about when the comment period ended for the comments for the surveys and such, which I don't believe there's a end date right now. The plan is for them to be ongoing. Is that right?
So we have our final engagement in person is on November 19th. So I think we'll probably keep this open, these tools open for the month of November. We will close them in order to kind of have a clear understanding of like, okay, this is what we've gotten so far. What do we need to do with this? But we fully anticipate, and I apologize, I didn't mention this earlier, this is an additive process. So we've started with the zoning districts and map and use table. And when we bring out the development standards that the consultant shares with us, We are going to be able to continue talking about the zoning districts and map and use table, as well as take a look at those development standards. So we have the opportunity to continue to get feedback, and we'll be sure to have tools that allow folks to continue to do that throughout, but it will be kind of, we'll still be closing specific tools at the end of an engagement in order to just kind of keep that information organized.
Great. All right. My name is Bo Dobrinsky. I'm with the planning department. We've got a ton of questions. I've already been provided in the chat. I'm going to begin there, and obviously, and then we can go to the folks that have got their hands raised. So there was a question about the street design standards and how they would be integrated from, I believe, John Talmadge. So yeah, certainly with council's recent adoption, this is on our mind. The second module of the UDO, as Lisa talked about, that technical consultant is putting together currently, will be in the next coming months. There will be some design standards in terms of infrastructure, certainly as a component of that. But the reference guide for development would have subsequent changes that would correspond with those. And so that's where that's housed, and in terms of the layer regulations Lisa described. There was a question as well from Jessica about the flagpoles. We are working with Public Works and the other partner departments, but the UDO itself does not mandate any sort of flagpoles, or it doesn't get into those requirements. And just to clarify for Ethel, I know you had asked, what was being referred to was for situations where there might be a flag lot, or sometimes it's a lot with double access at a corner. They'll need a certain amount of road frontage to access the public utility, and so they'll create a very, very skinny flagpole just for the utility access. And so that's an instance where the UDO's requirements don't necessarily align with Public Works requirements that are in reference guide for developments. And as Lisa pointed out earlier, there's a lot of layers to the development regulations. The next question I'd like to ask Scott Whiteman maybe to chime in and provide some additional context. This is as we some of the comments that Caitlin provided around RS20 our parcels within the urban growth boundary. Scott, would you like to?
Sure. Hi, I'm Scott Waitman. I'm also with the planning department. So in reference to the properties that are designated RD outside the city limits, but are within the urban growth boundary, the urban growth boundary is part of the comprehensive plan that says where it's a line basically where public water and sewer will not be extended past. So it's anticipated that anything within the urban growth boundary could be within the city in the future, because typically that's how water and sewer is provided, is through the city of Durham's water and sewer service. That being said, any property that is outside the city limits would have to be built on well and septic, and there's a health code requirement that there be a minimum of 1 acre for any development or any new lot that is outside the city. So it would require annexation into the city in almost all cases to take advantage of the new zoning. And under the city's policy and some state law, the city does not do involuntary annexations where the city annexes people who have not asked for it. The city only does voluntary annexations when it's requested by a property owner, in which case they could very likely take advantage of the zoning that's in place. Hope that helps explain that.
Thank you, Scott. Question about plans to change the affordability requirement in regards to 30 years. That's certainly, so for context for the rest of the call, currently the ordinance uses a 30-year period when referencing affordable housing requirements that are associated with like the density bonus that's in the ordinance. That is the type of feedback that we'd like to hear. That's not currently being proposed to be any specific amount at the time. But obviously 30 years is what we currently have. A question about incentivizing affordable residential development of smaller infill parcels. Oh, compliance on commitments, Ajax ASPHALT compliance. So yeah, that we will certainly have to continue the similar processes to what we have in regards to how we enforce affordable housing density bonuses or height bonuses that we currently have. We also have ongoing enforcement for proffers that are made at city council or county commissioners during resigning with the development plan. These oftentimes require either annual certifications or check-ins, and so yeah, we would have to continue to enforce. These would be subject to our zoning enforcement ordinances and civil penalty. I hope that helps, but yes, we recognize that those processes may continue to expand. There was a question about the height max in the RD district. I do not have the maximum heights required in all districts memorized, but I believe, yeah, RD, the base is 3 stories, 40 feet. So that's how it's proposed today. Certainly if folks want to comment on that, then again, I want to reiterate that the purpose is to engage and to hear folks' thoughts on these particular provisions. I commented earlier about impervious surface limits. Yeah, the watershed overlay districts are not being proposed to be touched, and those are where the limitations on the impervious surface are housed in the UDO. There was also a question about transparency requirements for commercial and industrial buildings. We currently have similar glazing or window requirements in our design districts. So think like downtown or near 9th Street, as well as Patterson Place. This would expand the form-based code in more areas of Durham. And if you look at the district standards for the RX or CX, there's window requirements in many instances. So I certainly do not want to miss anyone's questions. So please forgive me if I'm taking a bit of time. Oh, okay. Before I dig into sort of the new ones in the chat, Barbara Thielen, you've had your hand up quite a while. I'd like to call on you to ask your question. Go ahead and unmute.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I did not request a response from you. That's a mistake. I apologize.
All right, thank you. Britt Davis, if you'd like to go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah. First off, this is great. Thank you all so much for taking a weeknight to spend time and answer all these questions. So thinking about the transit opportunity areas, I noticed that they're kind of like concentrated in certain areas, and I'm wondering if there is a plan to extend them along corridors. Like, for example, Roxborough Road, you notice it's kind of concentrated right there by 85. Would there be a street plan or another type of TOD type of overlay that might kind of stretch that out along the corridor?
Great question, Britt. Scott, would you maybe speak a little bit about TOA and the justification for the place where it's located, and then maybe we can expand on future planning efforts, like as
Yeah,
referenced.
that's a good question. Yeah, so we
And Scott, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Just one more question about that is there a priority of like different transit opportunity areas? Again, thank you.
yeah, so at the moment the transit opportunity areas were just the ones that were adopted in the comprehensive plan. There was not necessarily a priority of one, we should focus on one before the other. That may need to be the case if we need to, do infrastructure upgrades or street planning or something like that. But as for UDO purposes, we're kind of treating them all the same. And you're right, they do tend to be concentrated in areas, and they were focused on areas that have often were existing developed commercial areas or areas that already had some high density. And in how Durham is built out, those tend to be clustered around major intersections. So for right now, they're more kind of they're less linear and more kind of concentrated around certain key areas. We'll have to see how well they succeed, and certainly could expand in the future when we do updates to the comprehensive plan. But right now, we're only focusing on where they're designated on the place type map.
Thank you.
All right, great. Looking into the chat. Thomas Hennessy is asking a question about the election between RD neighborhood 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, how would I know if the lot is in RD3? So those are 3 separate options. All of them are the base district of RD, which is shown as RD1. If as the property develops, the applicant could elect to choose either the compact option or the affordable options. And in those instances, that's when they would get the additional density or the additional height that corresponds with the 2 or the 3. So it's elective, and it's not mapped on particular properties. All of the RD could potentially develop as the other 2, as long as they volunteered to make those commitments. Yeah, let's see. I think Carl already explained. There's a question here about public art from Margaret. Yeah, so currently the UDO has a few options where public art is an incentive for additional height in particular instances. Certainly, as we move forward with this UDO, we're interested in ways and places where the that type of incentivizing of addition of public art can occur and can continue to be encouraged. So yeah, definitely, if that's the type of feedback we'd love to hear. But yeah, we're interested in places and locations that are appropriate. What zoning allows for churches in residential neighborhoods? In the table that's currently posted, we've got it fairly similar to today, where it's a minor special use permit in several residential districts. That's certainly the type of thing that we'd like to hear feedback on. And I know I keep repeating that, but that's really the purpose of these engagement events, is to hear what you all think about the proposed districts. Now, will there be infill standards to reduce the height? What is being referred to in that question is in the current UDO. There are certain instances in what Lisa had described as our urban tier. Well, it is described as the urban tier. Instances where there are additional standards to help address context. The current districts do not have that is not the approach. There's different approaches to that, but so no, there's no additional infill standards at this time. In terms of the question about the material differences between the allowed uses of districts, I'd encourage you to look at the use table that was linked. And as you do that, please reach out with questions. That's what we're here for. Natalie, great question. So the RD2, RD3, those options, and again, there's corresponding optional provisions with the RX and CX districts as well. They would not need to go through a rezoning process. The idea is that they would be able to do that with an administrative approval in exchange for the smaller units, the additional design standards, or the affordable units and the additional design standards. I think I've got all of the questions in the chat, or at least all the separate questions that haven't been responded. Please raise your hand if I'm missing one, or send another chat. I do not want folks to miss an opportunity, or for anyone that has follow-up questions, certainly.
There were several questions about agriculture in the RD district.
In the RD district?
Yeah, I was going to say for any property outside the city limits, a bona fide farm is allowed regardless by state law, regardless of what the zoning allows. So any Caitlin, Natalie, I think maybe a few others had asked about that. So any property that's outside the city that has agriculture, a current agricultural use would be able to continue that and would still be allowed because of state law.
All right, there's a question about neighborhood commercial zoning being assigned with the adoption of the map, or will they be available for property owners to request? The adoption of the map or the rezoning of the property itself would designate the property as the neighborhood commercial zoning, and there'd be no further request needed by that particular property owner. The bona fide farm, that is a distinction made by the state. There's a question about are townhomes allowed in the RD district? So let me pull that slide back up. Yeah, in the current proposed use table, the multi-unit living is permitted in the RD district. It would have to meet the corresponding development standards in the either RD1, RD2, RD3, and so in some instances, those options would necessitate either the compact option or the affordable option. Jessica's asking a question about review options for someone who wants to be reviewed under proposed zoning, if it will affect their project. Yes, this is something as we get closer to potential adoption of different regulations on a property. We recognize that we will potentially need to allow applicants to submit under a proposed district. I think that would be very close, much closer adoption. We're a long way from that being an option. So, but that is a practice that we've done with other ordinance changes as well.
I think we have one hand raised from Kia Campbell, and then there's a question from Britt about form-based code in the chat. I can copy it. Why don't we have Kia?
Sure.
Hi, yeah, no, my question got skipped. So I just was gonna ask it out loud. But I'm gonna read it. It was a little bit long. And this was really me just trying to understand the new zones. Like I just looked at the mapping. So like I live in the city limits, and I live in a neighborhood where most people have like a third to an acre of land. And it's single family homes. And so I noticed that my neighborhood would become RD as most of the neighborhoods around. And so I guess I'm just trying to understand, because I saw that RD seemed to be based on 5,000 acre lots. I mean, excuse me, 5,000 square foot lots versus most of us in my neighborhood have 14,000 plus square foot lots. And so I guess I was just trying to understand that, like, if my neighbor were to sell they have like 2/3 of an acre of land, am I understanding from the like RD 1, 2, and 3 that potentially each 5,000 square foot section of their land could have 4 houses put on it? So like I could go from having like one neighbor next door to having like 16 neighbors next door. I was just trying to make sure I was understanding it properly.
Yeah, that is correct. Now there are other limitations, other practical limitations, such as impervious surface limits or height, and other development standards that the UDO may include. But that is you're reading that correctly in terms of the density itself.
And so then I guess the last part, and then I don't want to hog up time, but is there, and I know that we can put commentary on like on the map. I'm just curious as to why like a neighborhood like mine that has historically been like this would not have been the rural one, which I think was like RB, where it was like everybody has like 20,000 acre lots. Like, I'm just curious, like why RD versus RB, like based on the way the neighborhood actually currently is. And maybe that could just be a comment that I put in there.
Yeah, certainly that is the type of comment that, that sort of mapping comment. I will just reiterate, and not to say that your comment isn't 100% welcome and worthwhile, but when we talk about building in and up and out and acknowledging the growth, we anticipate that throughout the UGB or throughout all the city limits, not necessarily just in downtown or what is currently considered the urban tier. And so that's that is part of the change that was talked about. But thanks, Q.
Mm-hmm.
All right, go ahead, Donald. You have a question? Come off unmute. All right, no disregard.
Bo, I'll just read out the question. There's a question about form-based codes, which is basically asking, so understanding that we're sort of moving towards more form-based code, they can have some benefits. They sometimes limit density. Are there any considerations for using a hybrid approach that incorporates floor area ratio or maybe performance-based zoning to balance form with flexibility and density?
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. In terms of considerations, this is the approach that we've currently got drafted or proposed, but we recognize that there are what is the idiom about skinning a cat, right? There's all types of ways to approach, but what's currently proposed is a bit of a hybrid approach as it is.
And then there was a quick follow-up, if you could just explain what form-based code is.
Sure. And I would describe it as, less focus on density and use and more regulations about the way the development is built and looks and feels to the community, rather than having a use table with a whole lot of bunch of different uses and interested in the particulars of the activity. It's more about the built environment and how it impacts the community. I will say that our downtown, our 9th Street area, and out in Patterson Place all have design districts that are heavily form-based in terms of how they're regulated. And certainly, if any of the other planning staff on the call want to speak to that.
One thing that I just wanted to talk about really quickly is that there's like a whole section of the UDO called non-conforming uses. And so this is essentially to say that if you have a use right now that is allowed within the UDO and then it changes, right? Like the UDO changes and that use is no longer allowed, or, something else has changed, right? Like your building is taller, then, it's allowed now, or something along those lines, right? Like the ordinance has changed. There's a portion in the UDO because you are what's called legal non-conforming. This is essentially to say that you did not do this sneakily, this is a legal thing that you did, and now it is no longer allowed. And so I think some of these questions about ag have 2 points, right? Like I think all of the input is great, glad to hear it. I hope that you'll actually put it on like the map-based platform so that we can look specifically at those districts. But I also just wanted to say that like this is not like you will have to stop tomorrow. You are a legal non-conforming use if the UDO changes. So I did just want to throw that in there because we're getting a lot of it in the chat. I am happy to engage more around ag uses, but I think in the meantime, I do hope that those sort of specific questions as they relate to specific properties and what the zoning is partially why we're here, right? Like they haven't been decided or assigned. The mapping tool is up for you to go in and say, hey, X, Y, or Z should be X, Y, or Z because X, Y, or Z, right? And so I just wanted to make those 2 things clear. We're not outlawing horses in the county, et cetera, things like that. We're not going to come and take your goats away. Even though I would love a pet goat, my dog would not be happy. So I wanted to clarify that.
Thanks, Rob. Thomas Hennessy's raised your hand. Go ahead and come off mute.
All right. I think, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Thank you. How are you doing? Everything's great so far. Amazing job.
Thanks.
I have a question. I'm looking more at this slide, the RD3 option about the increased density, 1 unit for every 625 square feet. And I can't help, I'm thinking logistically, like parking and driveway, right now the driveway standards and the coverage area for driveways really limits how many cars can park on a lot right now. I think it's only 12 feet wide in the RU5-2 zone. It could fan out to 24, but I think it has a max coverage area of 400. But which is great if we're increasing density and we want more units, do you foresee driveway standards and, parking area standards changing for the residential zones?
Yes, yeah, they will certainly be different, and I imagine in some instances more limiting, and others more flexible. That's going to vary, because I think that we still have the similar concerns of an entire stretch of asphalt or concrete, for example. But yeah, that is certainly but they'll be different because obviously they won't, like what you're referencing is, I think, the infill standards only. and it's a different framework.
Right. If we get 8 units on a lot, I mean, certainly I think the market will demand parking. But if the driveway standards limit that, I find it hard that 8 units will actually be built. So I hope, going forward, when you're working through the logistics, that we loosen up the driveway standards and the parking area standards. That would be very helpful.
Yeah, you'll see on the, like, looking at the RD3, where it talks about parking location.
Yeah.
Driveway only allowed in the street yard, but
Yep.
the parking's permitted in the side and rear. So certainly the idea there is having the parking behind the building.
Right. I agree with that.
Buildings. Yeah. So and you'll have flexibility as long as it's to the rear, not in the street yard.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Peggy, go ahead and you've got your hand raised for a question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm wondering if you're in an HOA that has an architectural committee that approves building issues, if someone buys a lot in our HOA and wants to change it from a single family building to one of these multifamily buildings, would they still need to follow the HOA's guidances?
They would. So your covenants are enforced by your HOA, and this would not modify your covenants, or the zoning change would not modify your covenants.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Right, I see some really good discussion in the chat. I think we're caught up on questions though. No other hand raised. Just before, I guess it'd be time to wrap up. Anyone on planning staff have anything to add? Anything that we've missed? Great. So we've got you'll get in the chat. We've got a host of additional materials that may help answer some of your questions as well. The question was just asked about properties as HOAs, and we have some FAQs. The materials located in the website that Lisa shown earlier. Please use these resources. If you have questions as you pour through them, please reach out at newudo@durhamnc.gov. I really appreciate all of your interest and attendance this evening, and as we move forward with the process, hope to continue this strong engagement. Thanks, everyone.